Ben Shapiro. So I've been following Ben Shapiro for many years, and one thing, he talks really fast and he can be very argumentative and very abrasive. But one thing that I like about Ben is that he doesn't shy away from the challenges of issues. He will go into like deep dives on issues in the United States, whether it's violence, racism, issues affecting the Jewish community, issues affecting other communities. He doesn't shy away from that. And I really appreciate that, because in this time, it's very easy, especially in our media, to only look at surface level, or look at issues from a surface level. But Ben goes into a deep dive. So I was interested when he went to Oxford that he spoke about the Israel-Hamas war. And I think I expected Ben more. I expected more from Ben. I expected him to do that deep dive, and it didn't go that way. So I'm just going to share with you what the video is about. Interestingly enough, you go to YouTube and you click on it. This wasn't the case just a few days ago. It says the following content may contain graphic or violent imagery. I understand and wish to proceed. And then when you click that, there was another warning, like users may be triggered. Anyways, this is on the 30th of October, and I'm just going to hit play here.
Ben Shapiro is an American conservative commentator and columnist. He's a graduate of UCLA and Harvard Law School. He's authored over a dozen books and currently serves as the editor emeritus of the Daily Wire. He's the host of The Ben Shapiro Show.
Okay, I'm just going to fast forward it a little bit here.
And has over 6
common sentiment that you see 100,000 people marching in the streets of London in a pro-Hamas rally, or why it is you see widespread sentiment honeycombed throughout American universities and universities throughout the West in favor of Hamas after Hamas committed the worst pogrom against Jews since the Holocaust. And let me be extremely clear about this. I brought some visual aids for those people who don't actually believe what is
so Ben
true,
actually,
that Hamas is not the...
He actually shows visual imagery of children. I don't know if you want to see that personally, so I might fast forward through it. Whoops.
As the West, Hamas is not morally equivalent to Israel. If you don't believe me, this is what Hamas is. This is what Hamas is. Hamas is, and the answer is because the West is ashamed.
I just want to fast forward through that because it's very graphic.
Of its own values. In fact, what the West really is ashamed of the superiority of its own values. Not everybody thinks the same way. Not everybody thinks the same way. Now, there are plenty of political disagreements to be had on all sides. There are plenty of disagreements to be had with regard to a two-state solution. But there is no disagreement to be had between the values of Hamas and the people who support Hamas and the values of the state of Israel or the values of the West. Anybody who equates those values is making a serious category error. The West has become shy about its own principles. The West has become humiliated by its own principles and instead has decided to substitute an idiotic notion that everybody thinks the same way, and it's not true. And because the West thinks that, the West falls into these category errors where they believe you can buy off terrorist groups like...
Okay, so I'm just going to pause there. So I'm seeing a bit of a confusion from Ben. I think Ben thinks that if you criticize Israel, you somehow support Hamas. And he's making this argument, and again, it's very surface level to me, that we can't be able to critique Israel's response. Now, don't get me wrong. What Hamas did on October 7th violated every international war crime there is, targeting civilians. They should be tried and charged for that. But we also have to take a very clear look at the response from Israel. And this is very similar to, when the United States invaded Afghanistan after 9/11, or not invaded Afghanistan, but when they went after the Taliban and when they went into Iraq in 2003, it's like the response needs to also be looked at. Many people, many U.S. senators, congresspeople were against the United States going into Iraq and the invasion that ensued. So it's interesting that Ben here takes a very strong stance in thinking that somehow if you critique Israel, you are equating moral equivalency with Hamas, but I'll keep letting it go.
Hamas, where they believe that Hamas's actual goal is not what they say. Hamas openly says their goal is to exterminate all Jews. But we can't believe them because we're so paternalistic that we believe that we don't believe them. It must be economic discontent. It must be a land dispute. Or maybe it turns out that people who burn babies in their cribs, who rape mothers in front of their children and then murder both of them, maybe they don't think like you. Maybe they don't think like me. Maybe these are people who have a different worldview, and that worldview cannot be combated by pretending it away with morally relativistic bullshit. Maybe that is what we are watching in the West.
Okay, so then again, like, this is where I just don't... I feel like Ben is now getting very emotional, and he's not thinking about this in a clear way. And it could very well be that Ben has family members or close friends that have been impacted by the war, maybe have even been killed in the war, or severely injured, or mentally, emotionally impacted. So this is where, again, it's very interesting to me that Ben starts going down this path of he's applying so much emotion to this issue, and he's conflating a lot of issues with Hamas, you know, like this two-state solution. Like he mentioned that there are potentially political outcomes that are political disagreements we can have, two-state solution, etc. But the way in which he frames it is, it's like, well, none of that matters because Hamas is evil. It's like, I think most everyone understands what Hamas is doing is wrong, but we have to move beyond that and put like what Israel's response is. Israel's response is also very, you know, scorched earth, it seems. We have to be able to delve into the nuance, and I just find it odd that Ben's not doing that. I'll keep letting it play.
And so what the West actually has to do is start to have a little bit more respect for its own values. And back in 1933, this union voted in humiliating fashion the so-called Oxford Oath that they would not defend king and country. And that was used by people like Hitler, like Mussolini, to believe that the West was weak. Any civilization that will not defend its own values, any civilization that creates an equation between its own values and the values of groups like Hamas is weak. And that is not something the West can afford. Now, 6 million Jews died in camps and died in ditches, waiting for the West to discover that its values were superior to the values of the Nazis. The state of Israel exists so that the Jews don't have to wait anymore, and thank God for that. But this is not about Israel for the West. What it is about is whether the West is going to defend values that actually matter. It's about whether the West is going to recognize once and for all that its values are not the same as those of groups like Hamas, that not everything can be talked out in negotiations in a room, that the people who...
Okay, so I see Ben's point, obviously, because Hamas's charter, if I can get that up, is pretty wild. Like, if you actually look at what Hamas says about Israel, it says here, the covenant proclaims that Israel will exist until Islam obliterates it, and jihad against Jews is required until Judgment Day. Compromise over the land is forbidden. The documents promote holy war as divinely ordained, reject political solutions, and call for instilling these views in children. So this is exactly what Ben Shapiro is saying. You know, their charter is fundamentally against Western values. It says the original 1988 version. Now, this is the original 1988 version. Destroying Israel and establishing an Islamic theocracy in Palestine is essential. Unrestrained jihad is necessary to achieve this. Negotiated resolutions of Jewish and Palestinian claims to the land are unacceptable. Listen to this. It says, negotiated resolutions of Jewish and Palestinian claims to the land are unacceptable. That's interesting. Even if Palestinians negotiate with Jews, it's unacceptable to Hamas. Historic anti-Semitic tropes that reinforce the goals. Wow. The covenant proclaims that Israel will exist. If I can get the actual... This is wild. Understanding Hamas's... Oh. Well, guess what? This link is dead. All the motorcycles. Oh my God. Why? Is this gonna like take me to... Okay. Released on August 18th, 1980, the original covenant spells out clearly Hamas's genocidal intentions. Yeah, so these are there's 36 articles, and they could be summarized here. The covenant of the Islamic resistance movement clarifies its picture, reveals its identity, outlines its stand, explains its aims. Wow. When you really get into it, it is pretty wild. So Ben Shapiro is right. You know, Hamas's charter is it's not at all aligning with Western values. And again, I think what Ben is doing, he's equating Western values with Hamas. Like, if you criticize Israel, somehow you are aligning with Hamas. And it's so odd that Ben is taking such a strong stance. Again, I'll keep letting it play, but I just want to make that little dovetail so that you can see exactly what Hamas's end goals are.
Would do the sorts of things that we saw on October 7th are not morally equivalent to people who try to target those terrorists who are trying to kill those terrorists while the terrorists themselves are bragging about putting civilians atop their rockets. Okay, any moral equivalence that's drawn in this conflict by the people who are chanting outside should be treated as evidence of anti-Semitism, because there has never been a clearer moral contrast than what we are seeing right now. There's been a lot of talk about the two-state solution, about the Israeli-Arab conflict over the course of decades. That's obviously going to continue. But if you cannot take sides between what we saw on October 7th and what we see in Hamas and what Israel is doing in response, you have lost all moral credibility.
In a 2019 interview, you said that hate speech is a principle that does not exist. And in 2021, you said that no one should be fired over a tweet.
I think what Ben is saying, and again, I think most everyone would agree that somehow we are equating Hamas with moral equivalency in the West. We're not doing that. Oh, I shouldn't say we. Most people are not equating Hamas with moral equivalency of the West. I think what people are doing is they're criticizing Israel's, again, I'm going to put this in quotations, scorched earth theory when it comes to its response to Hamas's invasion.
However, just a couple of weeks ago, you tweeted that if you work in the media and uncritically and reflexively parrot the genocidal, Jew-hating terrorist liars Hamas, you should be fired. So why have you drawn a line there? Why do you draw a line for people that you disagree with, but for yourself there is no line?
Oh no, I draw a line for people I disagree with when those people tend to back terrorist groups. So if you back a terrorist group, I don't feel that you are within the boundaries of free speech. I don't think there's no such thing as an Overton window.
You see, this is where, again, I don't disagree with Ben, but I just think that, like, he is, unlike so many other topics where he goes into the nuance, he's using very strong talking points here, like terrorist groups. It's like, can we delve under the surface a little bit and understand why these movements exist for the reasons that they do? I mean, let's not assume that Hamas exists in a vacuum. I mean, there are people who support Hamas. And the challenge for us in the West and all around the world is to understand why. Why is it that there are so many supporters of Hamas? What is the discontent that's happening? What actions have the West and Israel done in the region to force some to form a terrorist group? And here's an honest, my honest psychological assessment. I'm not a psychologist, but I'm just thinking about this in terms of human beings. Okay, so forget religion, forget culture for a second, but as human beings, right? So in order for you to form some type of terrorist organization, and let's just say you blow shit up for the sake of blowing shit up, you will receive widespread condemnation, and you will continue to be such a fringe person and group because everyone would see that you're just blowing stuff up for the sake of it. There's no end or aim to your goal, right? You would be totally discredited by most every single person. I mean, there might be some people that might, but you'll be so fringe and you won't connect to the hearts and the minds of most anyone. But when we see Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, ISIS, Hamas, when we see them gaining power and authority, the limitation that I see in the West is they think, or sometimes we think in the West, that, they just, by brute force, they've compelled people to believe in what they believe. And I'm not saying that that doesn't exist, but it also has to speak to some level of why a rational, regular person who's going about their day-to-day life would somehow say, yes, Hamas represents me, or ISIS represents me, or Al-Qaeda. These movements would not exist if they didn't at least appeal to a somewhat moderate or a somewhat rational or a person who's going about their day-to-day lives and say, that makes sense. So that's the challenge in the West. We're so quick to condemn, demonize, and there's a lot of reasons why we should. But the deeper issue, which I wish Ben actually would delve into, is the why. What is so attractive about these movements that people in Gaza, people in Palestine are gravitating towards? Yes, there's definitely a strong element of force, brute force, that Hamas must be using. But there's also something that Hamas is speaking to, perhaps, that we don't want to talk about or address.
is an Overton window. I just think it's very, very broad. I think openly supporting terrorist groups is beyond the Overton window. Also, by the way, if you're parroting the claims of Hamas,
hate speech? Is that hate speech?
So no,
it's not free speech.
Hate speech is not a legal category. Hate speech as punishable by the government is not a legal category. That's a different thing from the idea that I have an obligation as an employer to hire somebody who supports Hamas or Al-Qaeda. I certainly do not. And when it comes to the members of the media parroting Hamas, they shouldn't just be fired because they support Hamas. They should be fired because they're unbelievably crappy at their jobs. If you're parroting the Gaza Ministry of Health, which routinely lies about statistics, as said by the Washington Post in 2014 and the New York Times in 2014, and still the Washington Post and New York Times are uncritically parroting Hamas, well, at that point, you're really bad at your job. And you should be fired for being.
Oh, sorry about that. So I just wanted to show everyone this. If you're not aware, like I was not aware, I've always wondered whether or not, because when it comes to Palestine, there's the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, and then there's Hamas. And I've always wondered, like, Canada recognizes the Palestinian Authority, doesn't recognize Hamas, but the Ministry of Health in Gaza, right? Like, shouldn't that be the Palestinian Authority? It actually isn't, or it is. No, sorry, it is not. It's a government agency in the state of Palestine. The ministry is controlled by the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, but after Hamas's takeover of Gaza in 2007, Hamas governments have appointed alternate health ministers for the Gaza Strip. So Ben Shapiro's bang on here. Hamas runs the Ministry of Health in the Gaza Strip, and we can't trust here's the thing. Can we trust their numbers that they put forward? Probably not. You know what I mean? Probably not. But the challenge is that there's literally no other official record of what's happening in the Gaza Strip outside the Ministry of Health run by Hamas. So, it's the classic, like, well, who do we believe kind of thing, right? But in this case, Ben is bang on. Hamas wants to paint that picture that, Israel is killing all these civilians. And I'm not saying that they're not. Of course, there's a lot of civilians that have died in the Gaza Strip. But we have to also recognize that the Ministry of Health in the Gaza Strip is run by Hamas. Okay, I'll keep letting it play.
That bad at your job.
So it's okay for you to say things like, I know you've come under fire for this a lot, but the Arabs like to bomb, crap, and live in open sewage tweets.
I'm so glad you asked about this. So.
No, I knew this was going to come up, but you then later doubled down on it. And said it wasn't just...
I hate when interviews get like this, it just gets so like... Sorry, I'm just going to pause it. It gets very divisive and people are bringing out like, I said this 13 years ago, I said that. It's not conducive to a real structured debate or conversation. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like gotcha politics, if that makes sense. It's like, you said this back in 2009, you're bad. It's like, okay, all of us were very different people in 2009 or whatever, right? Like, we have to be able to stick to what this person's saying today. And there's a lot that Ben has said today that I wish the interviewer would ask Ben about, specifically about how he's been very surface level on his analysis of the Israel-Hamas war and not trying to understand the nuance and the complexity that he's done on other topics in his podcast and on YouTube.
Arabs that...
I'm just going to forward this because it just gets...
I think anybody's allowed to say that...
But anyone else can lose their job if they...
But I think that, when we talk about, what I said back in 2010, as you mentioned...
See, like, why are we talking about this? Okay? Like, I don't care about
in the
that.
And its allies is a terrorist group that would prefer to murder innocent people and get its own innocent civilians killed than to even care for those civilians. By the way, they openly say this. I mean, this is the part that's crazy. I mean, Hamas actually says this. One of the top Hamas officials literally said today that they do not care about their civilians. That it is the job of the UN and Israel to take care of their civilians. It's not their job. They're too busy in the tunnels.
I just want to touch more on the...
See, this would have been a great point. This would have been a great opportunity for the interviewer to pause right there and say, okay, like, I'm with you. I understand Hamas's article and charter and how they want the destruction of Israel. My question to you, Ben, is why is this appealing to so many, again, let's just say they are quote unquote average, but just regular normal people. Now, I'm not saying that the regular normal people of Palestine agree with everything Hamas is doing, but there must be a reason why it's gaining so much traction. Like I said before, otherwise it would just be this fringe movement that nobody would care about. It's kind of like people who say, oh, death to America and all this stuff. It's like, okay, like whatever, man. But there's a reason why Hamas is getting traction. And that, to me, is the issue that we really should be focusing on. What is it? What is it about this movement that's attracting Palestinians and others towards it?
Regarding free speech, that you think it's you do think there is a line. You think there's a line where something that someone says should be able to get them fired. Is that not a contradiction of your 2021 views, where you said that no one should be fired over a tweet?
No, because again, I think that when Sure.
That was good. I like that Ben actually admitted to that, It's like she finally got him,
You said the only solution is for Israel to annex the Gaza Strip and kill enough sons of bitches to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
Is that not using the same rhetoric, the same bigotry and violent rhetoric that you are accusing others of using?
No, because I'm talking about Hamas. No, I'm talking about Hamas. They should kill as many Hamas sons as bitches as they can find. How many Nazis do you have to kill to stop Nazi Germany?
You see, this is, again, like, this is where, again, I just really struggle with Ben. It's like, I get it, man. Hamas's charter is messed up, et cetera, but we have to go deeper. We have to understand the nuance and the complexity. And maybe I'm naive to think that that's possible, but Ben is very much taking this in terms of, like, right versus wrong. And, it reminds me so much of, do you remember, like, I don't know, some of you may remember this, but, like, when George W. Bush invaded Iraq, like, I just remember him using this similar phraseology, like, it's good versus evil. We got to get them terrorists. We got to get them bad people. And it's like, okay, like, there's a lot of complexity to this war and a lot of complexity to why people support Saddam and others. So it's just odd that Ben keeps using these talking points that I would relegate to politicians who don't know enough about the complexity.
And innocent Palestinian civilians.
Of course I do. You're the one who's not. When I say sons of bitches, I'm specifically referring to Hamas. I've made clear in every single podcast that I have done that civilians that the Israeli government seeks to protect civilians. They do. The amount. I mean, I've seen the tapes. I've seen the actual operations that they do.
You see, again, I think that, like, Ben is
far and away more than anything remotely like anything else in the region or really in the world. That to suggest otherwise is ridiculous. And of course, when I'm speaking about the sons of bitches, I'm not talking about normal Gazan civilians who I've routinely suggested ought to be protected as best can be done in a war zone. That's not the same.
Okay, so Ben, for some reason, I'm not saying that Israel is targeting civilians, but there's a lot of civilians that are dying as a result of Israel's airstrikes and bombing, and that is becoming more internationally well known. The fact that Ben, again, it just seems like he's this, I hate to say this about Ben Shapiro, because I really do like a lot of the things that he's put out in the past, but it seems like he's becoming a mouthpiece for the Israeli government. I know that sounds so obtuse for me to say that about Ben Shapiro, but he's not even attempting or trying to understand some of these issues.
But when it comes to Hamas, yes, I hope that they kill every single member of Hamas. I hope that every single member of Hamas is killed.
But the Gaza death toll is now reported.
So here's the other thing. It's similar to, so when I was reading up about Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and all these other movements, it's like, I remember a senior leader, I'll try to find it, but there's a really good book called, Stanley McChrystal wrote this really good book called Team of Teams. And it's about how the United States went into Afghanistan to fight Al-Qaeda. And what they found was that Al-Qaeda is a network of different cells of groups. And one of the senior leaders once told the General Stanley McChrystal that, if you kill me, it doesn't kill the network of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is a network. It's like the internet. It's like you can throw out someone's laptop or you can throw out a server farm, but there's so many server farms. And again, my whole purpose here is we have to get to the root as to why there are people who are gravitating towards the movement of Hamas, who are gravitating towards, who look at the charter and the articles within Hamas and say, yeah, like that makes sense to me. That to me is the root where we should try to understand people. And I think the inability for us to understand each other is what's leading to these conflicts. We're not able to say to each other, hey, you know, like, let's try to understand why people are being drawn to these movements. I sound like a broken record, but...
To be over 5,000. Almost half of the population of Gaza is under the age of 18, and those are statistics that have been supported by the WHO and Save the Children. Israel has recently turned off the electricity, water supply, and you've spoken about this issue about Israel and Palestine a lot in recent interviews. You've rightly condemned the atrocities that occurred on October 7th to innocent Israeli civilians. I tried to find videos of you condemning the deaths of innocent Palestinian civilians at the hands of the IDF or Israel, but I couldn't find any.
Right, because
so
I don't draw moral equivalence.
I just wanted to ask you directly, will you condemn the deaths of innocent Palestinian civilians in the same way that you do innocent
That's a great question.
Absolutely not. And the reason I will not is because the killing is not done in the same way or with the same purpose. That's like saying, that do I condemn, that's like saying, will I condemn the person who murders a baby in their bed by burning them alive the same way that I condemn the police officer who's trying to arrest that person and accidentally kill someone in the process? Of course not. Those are not the same thing.
That's such an absurd, that is such an absurd, example. I can't find my words. That is such an absurd example. He's equating what Israel is doing in the Gaza Strip to a police officer who sees a baby burning and on his way to arrest the perpetrator accidentally kills someone in the process. How absurd is that? It's, you know, the better equation is on the way to help that to find the perpetrator that killed that baby, the police officer ran a red light and his car exploded and 20 people died. And then the police officer was okay, and he just kept, walking and finding the person who killed the baby. That example that Ben Shapiro, again, it's just so wild that he's using these very archaic, surface level understandings of this conflict. He doesn't even attempt to deep dive on it. What an absurd, I don't know. I just felt that was such an absurd example.
But there have been innocent, do you not sympathize with the life of an innocent Palestinian child?
Of course I do. That's why Hamas should surrender today. Hamas should surrender today. This bullshit that it's Israel's responsibility to protect Gazan civilians in a way that Hamas doesn't have to protect Gazan civilians, or that what's happening right now is not the result of Hamas's terrorism and currently holding over 200 hostages, including babies, in custody. That's insane. Trying to draw a moral equivalence between people who are making targeted strikes against terrorists.
So again, I think what Ben Shapiro is doing here is he's equating any type of civilian death in Gaza as a result of Hamas's policies and what Hamas is doing. And Hamas should surrender today if they want less civilian or no civilian deaths. Okay, here's a thought experiment. If Hamas were to surrender today and say to the West and to Israel, you know what, we're giving this all up. We apologize profusely for October 7th and the attack that we did. We take full responsibility. We would like to be prosecuted by the international criminal courts and other judicial bodies. We do not represent the Palestinian people. We want to live in peace, and the only way to peace is by us surrendering. And we totally get that, and we're going to rip up this charter. It clearly doesn't speak to anyone anymore, and we truly apologize. Let's just say hypothetically that were to happen. Do you honestly believe? And I would pose this to Ben because he takes this very surface level assessment. Do you honestly believe that the hearts and minds of people who have wholeheartedly supported Hamas will instantly change? Do you know what I mean? Like, do you think that people will suddenly be like, okay, well, I guess that's the case, and I guess that's it. It's over. We're going to live in peace and harmony with the Israelis. It's going to be fine. There's not going to be any civilian deaths. They're going to keep encroaching on the West Bank, and we're just going to not have anyone who's going to say anything against that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's, again, we have to understand why these movements gain so much traction. And for Ben to stay so surface level is just, it's very disheartening. If I could say that to him, I would say that, if I could. Ben, if you're listening, this is a very disheartening response.
Who are hiding underground in tunnels deliberately, violating international law. in violation of the Geneva Conventions, holding the other side's civilians underneath the ground while not providing their own people fuel, not providing them food, not providing them medicine, and that I'm supposed to equate Israel attempting to make targeted strikes with Hamas literally sending 2,000 terrorists across another nation's border and into civilian areas with no military goal, with purely the goal of murdering those civilians. I don't. Let me ask you. Why exactly would you equate?
I'm asking you.
No. Well, you asked several questions. So I'm asking.
You can't turn it. Hey, Ben, you can't turn it back on the interviewer.
That you're not prepared.
Why? Why won't you answer the question?
I find it really concerning that you're not prepared to condemn. To even admit that it's sad when an innocent Palestinian child dies.
Of course it's sad. I just said it's sad.
In the same way that it's sad when an innocent Israeli civilian dies.
Of course it's
Why are those two not equally saddening to you?
So I think like this is where the interviewer I don't agree with personally. Like it's just she's focused too much on the individual. And again, I don't want to discount the civilian death toll, of course. But the bigger question here is not about condemning civilian deaths. I think most everyone agrees that that is wrong and that is punishable by international law, or it should be at least. That's a base level, right? It's like condemning, it's like a circular argument. I condemn this person, well, I condemn, okay, and then we're on the same page. The bigger question is, why isn't Ben trying to understand the movement of Hamas and what could have led as the underpinnings to October 7th? That's the conversation we absolutely need to be having.
I'm, of course, incredibly sad when anybody be blamed for all of that, and Hamas should surrender today. Will you call on Hamas to surrender?
Absolutely.
Okay, so then we're in agreement. Great.
Okay.
Again, this gets kind of awkward here.
You have recently shifted from, or not recently, you have also shifted from doing a lot of serious interviews on Israel-Palestine to moving to more pop culture sort of things like your 43 minutes commentary on the Barbie movie.
Sort of the reverse. I did the Barbie, to be fair.
Okay, well, now I don't care anymore. But anyways, I just found this whole thing very weird for Ben. I was expecting a lot more from Ben. I was expecting a much more deep dive, a much more academic discussion. And instead, he just piped off these speaking points that, replace Ben Shapiro with the spokesperson for the Israeli government. Do you get a different response? I don't know. I'm going to fill the internet with more engaging, thought-provoking questions, though. So if Ben's not asking the questions, I definitely will be. My whole goal with the Israel-Hamas war is to understand what led to October 7th. So I'll try to post some really good content about that. I hope you enjoyed this. Again, I was just really disappointed with how Ben phrased this whole talk. And I thought that more people should start being aware of the surface level discussions that so many political commentators are doing. And I will say that there was a time when all of these people, Ben Shapiro and others, were the counter to what we were hearing in the news, right? Like I said this before, but open minds, shameless plug for my podcast right here, exists because the media isn't doing a deep dive on the issues. In fact, they're trying to put you against each other and pitch you against each other. And I feel like after listening to Ben in this talk, he's doing precisely what I think mainstream or mass media would do on this topic. Again, replace Ben Shapiro with Israeli government spokesperson. Is there a difference? Replace Ben Shapiro with a media outlet that supports Israel. Is there a difference? But Ben Shapiro not too long ago was that person who would actually be like, hey, by the way, the issues of racism in America is much more deeper than what the media is telling you. So I found this interview very odd, very, very strange for Ben. And I was just disappointed with it. But those are my thoughts. Subscribe, like, share, let me know your comments below, and I will definitely catch you in the next one.